Today I'm going to show you how to transform your stairs using Hewn Flooring and their stair nosings. Hi, I'm Morgan from Morgan Run Home and welcome to my channel. When I first started this stair project, the stairs were covered in blue carpet and the walls were covered in paneling, so I knew I had my work cut out for me. At the time, I didn't know what type of flooring I wanted in the room, so I first just started with stripping down the stairs and replacing the carpet with paint. I used paint from the Oops section at the hardware store, and I replaced the balustrade with a new handrail, new balusters, and a new newel post. This alone was enough to transform the stairs, but I also decided to add a runner so that there was something that my dog's paws could grip onto. We let it sit like that for a couple years, and finally when I found my dream flooring in the Hewn stone form flooring, I knew that this is what we wanted to use going forward, and I saw that they had stair nosings. So I started drafting up my plans to start integrating Hewn flooring into the home and working on the stairs. These are the tools I used to demo the stairs to get them ready for the nosings. Now, definitely check with your code in your area to make sure that your stair treads are still the correct depth that they need to be. My stair treads already had a built-in bull nose. Not all stairs will have this. If you do have this, you may have to cut off yours like I did mine. I'm not saying this is the only way to do this, but this is how I did mine. I started with the circular saw, and on the steps that had ends on either side, I had to plunge it in. Creating a spacer definitely also helps, and I had to use a jigsaw up at the walls. Unfortunately, the jigsaw didn't get all the way to the wall as well, so then I had to pull it off like this. It was really nice to see how it could snap away, but I still had to get in there with the oscillating saw to clean it up. And I had to repeat this for all of the 13 steps. Luckily, the hewn floors are super easy to cut using a table saw or a circular saw. The stair nosings only cover about 4 inches off of the front of the stair, so this will just help me get to the back riser. When cutting the plank, make sure you cut off the part that you don't need to lock the nosings into. I ended up deciding to put in the risers first. I just used liquid nails and popped it into place, and I actually ended up using some tape just to secure it so it didn't pull out in the center. To avoid having an exposed edge for the bottom 5 stairs, I ended up installing these stair brackets on the edge to give a really nice clean edge to that riser. Depending on whether or not you want the plank riser or like a white vinyl riser, that might not be a necessary step. Looking back, there is one major thing that I would do differently, and that would be to use a tread measuring tool. I cut all of these with a plank cutter at a 90-degree angle, which sounds great in theory, but if you know anything about construction, you know that nothing is ever straight. Now that the risers are in, before installing the treads, now would be a great time to secure any of your loose steps. This house was built in the 80s, and there were definitely a few stairs that would squeak and creak when we walked on them. For installing the treads, I was super liberal with my liquid nails. I did not do this for the first step, and I started noticing almost right away that it was creaking when I would put weight into it. I ended up pulling up that first step and absolutely covering it in construction adhesive and smearing it around to avoid any air pockets that might result from the construction adhesive in the squiggles. It has been 8 months since I actually installed these stairs, and I can confirm that they haven't creaked since. It's really important that when you lock the nosing into the planks that you make sure you don't see any of that gray from the base material. That's why you'll see me really pushing it in on one side and then it'll pop out on the other. So that's why using weights will really help keep it secure and keep it in place while it dries. I didn't have very many weights at this point, so I was just doing a couple steps at a time. This is where things get really wild. The 5 steps on the bottom have one exposed side into the living room, and I wanted to make sure that that flooring was mitered and was the cleanest corner you've ever seen, which resulted in the weirdest shape cuts and the weirdest jig I've ever made. It took me a week of staring at this flooring to figure out even what kind of jig I wanted to make, but I ended up taking a 2x4, cutting it at a 45, and then nailing the cutoff part to the side. Either way, it resulted in this little platform that I could use my tiny clamps to connect it to and use the 45 right there. I tried to do this in other ways, but this just seemed the way that worked the best. You could theoretically use a jigsaw, but I didn't trust that that would be a clean miter. Hey, maybe there's a better way to do it, but this is just what worked really well for me. And if you need a clean, straight cut on the miter saw, I just used a piece of scrap plywood and set it on top of that. Because there's no lock on the end of the planks, it's really important to remove that little groove on the side pieces. I ran the bullnose along my table saw fence and let it slide on top of pieces of plywood just barely so that the table saw blade only cut the bottom part of the plank. The first few of these I tried to use an oscillating saw and it came out so messy and really didn't look good at all, but this was the cleanest way I figured out how to do it. Slow and steady is the name of this game, and cutting things too big on purpose is also really important. Cutting off little slivers at a time, checking to see if it fit, cut off another sliver, checking to see if it fit, was how I did this, and it was the only way I could get the cleanest corner possible. I really think a set of Collins miter clamps would have been really helpful on these corners. I recommend dry fitting absolutely everything before you install the actual pieces using the construction adhesive. Once it's in place, don't be afraid to add some tape just to keep it in place. Again, I think the Collins miter clamps would have been really helpful at this point. When ordering material, definitely order extra. Usually they say up to 10%, but for stairs where you know you're gonna have a lot of wild cuts, I definitely recommend getting maybe 10 to 15% extra material. This was probably my best corner and my pride and joy, of course. I ended up using a little bit of caulking to make sure that it was extra clean, but I'm very proud with how these turned out. If you're DIYing this, my best advice is to go slow, take your time, and give yourself grace. If you don't have miters to worry about, you'll probably be fine, but that was definitely the most stressful part for me that I messed up the most. When I had removed the carpet and installed the balusters for my railing, I decided I was too cool to look up how to do it, and so I just guessed and I chiseled away a little square into the wood base for the 1/2 inch balusters. But I figured out the actual way, or at least a way that you can do it. I found these baluster fasteners that have this double-sided screw, which is a much smaller hole than I had previously. Then you install a rubber tube thing that fits inside the baluster. This would result in the cleanest application because what I had before was not clean and I was kind of embarrassed about it. The double-sided screws came with a driver that you could use with your drill to install them, but I definitely recommend using a ratcheting wrench to install the black tubes. In order to cut the balusters to size, I did use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel back a couple years ago when I had first done these stairs. It was definitely scary cutting into the new treads, but it looks so clean and it looks so much better. When you're just starting off and learning, sometimes the up close is scary, but I was really impressed with how good it looks up close and personal. I did need to add my runner back, not only for sound dampening purposes, but for navigating up and down the stairs without slipping, especially with the dog. I'm also a sucker for vintage hardware and pairing modern pieces with vintage pieces, so I had to add a stair runner rod. Though it did add
I just think it
more
looks so
screw
good.
holes into the stairs, so keep that in mind when you're doing yours.
And that's how I transferred my stairs. It took a couple of months. I'm so happy with how it turned out. This is what I had always imagined that it would look like in the end, and I'm so glad that with Hewn Flooring, I was able to get there. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe and visit me over at Morgan Brown Home. Okay, bye!